Imagine walking down the street, minding your own business, when you come across a homeless man begging for money. You've seen people like him countless times. But something about this man seems different. His eyes carry a story, an untold tale of hardship and perseverance. Maybe you've even given $1 or $2 to people in similar situations, hoping to make a small difference. But then, something completely unexpected happens. A billionaire, a man with everything anyone could dream of, approaches this beggar. What happens next will leave you speechless. This isn't your average story of a rich person doing a good deed. It's not just a simple act of charity. What this billionaire does next will not only change the life of the beggar, but will also shake the very foundation of everything we think we know about luck, fate, and the power of kindness. It all started on an ordinary afternoon. The billionaire, let's call him Mr. Davis, had just wrapped up a busy day in the city. He had everything that money could buy: luxury cars, private jets, a mansion on a hill, and a bank account with more zeros than he could count. But despite all of his wealth and success, something was missing. He had everything, yet he felt empty inside. His life, though full of riches, lacked the kind of warmth, connection, and purpose he longed for. He knew that he had been blessed with unimaginable wealth, but he was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, money wasn't everything. On that day, as Mr. Davis was leaving a meeting, he passed a homeless man sitting on the sidewalk. The man had a weathered face, eyes full of pain and experience, and his clothes were tattered beyond recognition. This wasn't just any beggar, though. There was something about him that caught Mr. Davis's attention. It wasn't the fact that he was asking for money, nor was it his appearance. It was the look in his eyes. It was a look that said, "I've been here for far too long, and I've given up on the world." The beggar wasn't even asking for money. He was simply sitting there, watching people walk by without a glance, without hope. But as Mr. Davis stood there, something inside him stirred. He felt a tug at his heart, something he hadn't felt in years. The beggar's name was Elijah. He had been homeless for over a decade. Living on the streets after a series of misfortunes had turned his life upside down. First, it was the loss of his job, then his family, and finally, his home. One thing led to another, and Elijah found himself with nothing. He didn't have the energy to dream anymore. He was simply trying to survive. But despite the harshness of his reality, Elijah held on to one thing, a small diamond he kept hidden in his jacket pocket. It was a gift from his late mother, a token of love and resilience that he refused to part with, even though he had nothing else. As Mr. Davis walked past, he felt a strange pull. Without thinking, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something that would surprise anyone who knew him. A beautiful, flawless diamond. It was a rare and expensive jewel, worth more than many people's entire life savings. It was the kind of diamond that could change a life overnight. Without even a second thought, Mr. Davis walked up to Elijah, looked him in the eye, and placed the diamond in his hand. "I don't know what it is about you," Mr. Davis said, his voice quiet but sincere, "but I think you need this more than I do." Elijah's hands trembled as he held the diamond. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had never imagined that someone like Mr. Davis would even acknowledge him, let alone give him something so valuable. It was as though the world had turned upside down in that one moment. Mr. Davis walked away, leaving Elijah standing there, clutching the diamond in his weathered hands. But the surprise didn't end there. The next day, Elijah did something he hadn't done in years. For the first time in a long time, he got up with a purpose. He wasn't sure what to do with the diamond, but he knew it was worth something big. As he walked through the streets, trying to make sense of everything, he was approached by a local jeweler who noticed the diamond in his hand. The jeweler's eyes widened, and he immediately asked Elijah where he had gotten it. Without a moment's hesitation, Elijah told him about the billionaire who had given it to him. The jeweler couldn't believe it. He had heard of Mr. Davis. Of course, who hadn't? The idea that the billionaire would give a diamond to a beggar was almost too unbelievable to fathom. But what happened next? What Elijah did with the diamond would change the course of everything. And that's where the story truly begins to take an unexpected turn. You might be wondering, how could this possibly go any further? How could a beggar, with nothing but a gift from a stranger, have any chance of changing his life or the lives of those around him? What happened in the days following the diamond exchange? What consequences did this single act of generosity set into motion? Stay tuned, because you won't believe what Elijah did next. The way the story unfolds will leave you questioning everything you know about fate, kindness, and how one small moment can completely transform a person's life. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss what happens next. The next morning, Elijah found himself standing in front of the small jewelry shop, staring at the polished windows reflecting the early morning light. His hand still clutched the diamond, its sharp edges pressing into his palm, its weight a reminder of how much his life had already begun to shift. He wasn't sure what to expect, but deep down, something in him told him that this moment was more significant than any he had ever experienced. He had always lived by the rhythm of survival, focusing on finding his next meal or finding a safe corner to sleep. But now, for the first time in years, he felt as if the world was offering him a chance to make a choice. The jeweler, a middle-aged man with a sharp nose and glasses perched low on his face, took one glance at the diamond before his eyes widened in disbelief. His hands trembled as he inspected the stone under the light, his voice wavering as he asked Elijah where he had found it. "I didn't find it," Elijah said quietly, his voice shaky. "A man gave it to me. A billionaire, I think." He couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. It felt surreal to even say them out loud. The jeweler, still stunned, leaned back in his chair. He knew the diamond. Everyone in the business did. It was a rare piece, a one-of-a-kind jewel that had made headlines years ago when it was first acquired by Mr. Davis. The billionaire was known not only for his immense wealth, but for his reclusive lifestyle, and his diamond collection was the stuff of legend. No one had ever imagined that such a valuable item would end up in the hands of someone like Elijah. The jeweler's eyes narrowed, calculating something behind them. After a long pause, he finally spoke. This is incredible. You're telling me that Mr. Davis gave you this, just like that?" The jeweler's voice was thick with disbelief. Elijah nodded. "That doesn't make sense. There's no way he would have just given it away, especially not to someone like you." Elijah recoiled at the remark. The words stung, but he didn't argue. He knew the world saw him as nothing more than a beggar, a nameless face in the crowd. But for the first time in years, a strange sense of worth rose within him. Someone had seen him. Someone had acknowledged his existence in a way that no one else had. "I don't know why he gave it to me," Elijah said, his voice steadying. "I don't know if I even deserve it, but he did, and it's mine now." The jeweler looked at him, the wheels turning in his head. "You don't understand, do you? This diamond, it's worth millions. It could change your life, but it could also bring a lot of trouble. Mr. Davis didn't give this to you just out of kindness. People like him don't just give away that kind of wealth unless they want something. They don't do things without a reason." Elijah stared at the jeweler, confused. What did he mean? Why would someone like Mr. Davis give him something so valuable, only to expect something in return? What could he possibly want from someone like him? Over the next few hours, Elijah sat in the small shop, the jeweler continuing to analyze the diamond. While his mind raced, what was happening to him? One moment, he was just another face in the crowd, invisible to the world. The next, he had something of such immense value, a gift from a man he would have never crossed paths with in his wildest dreams. It was a double-edged sword, an opportunity wrapped in danger. But Elijah wasn't the only one thinking about this diamond. Across the city, Mr. Davis was grappling with his own emotions. Since giving the diamond to Elijah, he had felt a gnawing unease in the pit of his stomach. The gesture had been spontaneous. Something in him had pushed him to do it, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that it had been a mistake. He had everything: money, power, influence. But giving away something as precious as that diamond felt like a risk he couldn't explain. Why had he done it? And why had Elijah reacted the way he did? In the hours that followed, Mr. Davis found himself growing more and more unsettled. He couldn't stop thinking about the beggar, about the way his eyes had looked at him in that moment of exchange. He hadn't expected anything from Elijah, but somehow he felt responsible for him now, a man who had lived through so much pain, so much struggle. Could one act of kindness change him? Or would it unravel everything Mr. Davis had worked for? The weight of his decision hung heavily on him, especially as whispers about the beggar and the diamond began circulating in the city. News outlets picked up the story, intrigued by the unusual act of generosity. People started asking questions. Why would a billionaire give away such a valuable asset to a homeless man? What was Mr. Davis's agenda? The public's fascination with the story grew, and soon there were rumors swirling that Elijah wasn't just a beggar. He was someone with a past that people were eager to uncover. Back in the jewelry shop, the jeweler's conversation with Elijah had turned more serious. He had been trying to convince Elijah to sell the diamond, suggesting that he could make a fortune off it. But Elijah couldn't shake the thought of the man who had given it to him. Mr. Davis had seen something in him, something worth believing in. Elijah didn't know what it was, but he wasn't ready to let go of that. Not yet. As the day turned into night and the city hummed with life, Elijah walked away from the jewelry shop, the diamond safely tucked into his jacket. The weight of it felt different now. It was no longer just a piece of jewelry. It had become a symbol of hope, but also of uncertainty. What was Mr. Davis's game? And what would happen to Elijah now that he had something so precious in his possession? The tension was building, and Elijah could feel it. He was caught in the middle of a story much larger than himself, and with each passing moment, the stakes were rising. The diamond had already begun to change everything, but the real question was, would it change him for better or for worse? As Elijah walked down the street, lost in thought, he had no idea that the next day would bring a confrontation he couldn't have predicted, a moment that would force him to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. The next day, as the sun dipped behind the city's skyline, Elijah sat on the same worn bench where his life had taken a turn just 24 hours ago. The diamond, still nestled in his jacket pocket, felt heavier now, not just because of its physical weight, but because of what it represented. He had spent the morning wandering the streets, unsure of what to do next. The jeweler's words echoed in his mind. People like Mr. Davis don't give away diamonds without expecting something in return. He wasn't wrong. As the hours passed, the pressure of the world closing in on him grew more intense. Everyone in the city was talking about the homeless beggar who had been gifted a fortune. News outlets, blogs, and even social media were alive with theories, questions, and fascination. Everyone wanted to know why Mr. Davis had given away something so valuable. Was it an act of charity, or was there something more behind it? Elijah's thoughts were interrupted when he heard the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps. He looked up, and there, standing in front of him, was Mr. Davis. The billionaire's face was taut, his jaw set, as though he had made a difficult decision. Elijah's heart skipped a beat. He had never expected Mr. Davis to come looking for him, especially not after giving him the diamond. "Elijah," Mr. Davis said, his voice calm, but filled with an underlying tension. "We need to talk." Elijah stood up slowly, his hand still clutching the diamond in his pocket. "I wasn't expecting you," he replied, his voice uncertain. Mr. Davis looked around, making sure no one was eavesdropping. "I'm sure you've heard the rumors by now. People are starting to ask questions. And He hesitated, his eyes searching Elijah's face as if trying to gauge the man's response. "I made a mistake." Elijah's mind raced. A mistake? He had thought giving the diamond away was an act of kindness, an impulse driven by something deeper than just money. But now it seemed like the billionaire was having second thoughts. "I didn't mean for this to get out of hand," Mr. Davis continued, his voice growing quieter. "I didn't expect people to make such a big deal out of it. I didn't want anyone to know, but now it's too late. The media is going to tear us both apart. People want to know why I did it. And I don't have the answer." Elijah, still processing what was happening, found his voice. "You gave me the diamond because you wanted to help. Don't you remember that?" Mr. Davis paused, looking at the ground for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone softened. "It's not that simple. I've been surrounded by people my whole life who only want something from me. I gave you that diamond because you reminded me of something I lost, a sense of meaning. But now, I feel like I've made a mistake." Elijah took a step forward, his hand still clutching the diamond. "You gave me a gift, something valuable. I don't want to give it back." Mr. Davis's eyes widened in surprise. "I'm not asking you to give it back, but I can't keep pretending that this is just a kind gesture. There's too much at stake here. You can't even begin to imagine what the consequences of this could be." For a long moment, the two men stood in silence. The weight of what was at stake, what the diamond represented, hung between them. Elijah could feel it. He didn't fully understand the billionaire's world, the pressure he lived under. But he did know one thing. He had been given a rare opportunity, an opportunity that could change his life. But at what cost? Mr. Davis broke the silence. "I want you to have it. I really do. But I also need you to understand the risks. People are going to start following you, and not everyone will be kind. If you're going to keep the diamond, you need to be ready for the consequences." Elijah looked at the diamond, its surface gleaming even in the fading light. It was more than just a jewel. It was a symbol of hope, a symbol of what could be possible if he made the right choices. He could sell it. He could use the money to escape this life, or he could take a different path, one that didn't just depend on luck or material wealth. "I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet," Elijah said, his voice steady. "But I'm not going to let it define me. I've spent too long being defined by what others think of me. This is mine, but it doesn't change who I am." Mr. Davis looked at him, a small smile playing on his lips. "That's what I wanted to hear. You're not just another pawn in this game, and neither am I. But we're both caught in something bigger than ourselves now. So whatever happens next, Elijah, just remember this. Don't let anyone else tell you who you are." With that, Mr. Davis turned and walked away, leaving Elijah standing there, the diamond in his pocket still glowing with potential. But now, it wasn't about the diamond. It was about the choices Elijah would make in the days to come. He wasn't going to let the world dictate his fate. As the evening sun set behind him, Elijah looked out at the city before him. The streets were filled with people, just like any other night, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. The diamond was his, yes, but more than that, he had a chance to rewrite his own story, and that was worth more than any jewel could ever be. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, Elijah felt in control of his own destiny, and that made all the difference.